Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I understand you're all directors. Is that correct? Or you have interest in directing? Okay, cool. Well, one of the things that I thought I might start with is sort of how I started directing, and then we can kind of slide into how I focused on solo shows, and then maybe a little bit about the process of creating one. Does that sound good? Okay. Well, I actually didn't know I wanted to be a director until I was an actor. I wanted to be an actor, and I did a lot of acting, which I think helps my directing a lot, actually. Um, and I was, doing a lot of leads. I did some TV. I did a bunch of stuff, and I was very happy and thought that's all I'd ever want to do. Very focused on that. And then I went to undergrad at CSUN, which is Cal State Northridge, and my acting teacher was on a soap opera. He was on General Hospital, and he's an adjunct, teacher. And he was always filming, and he would call me and say, "Can you take the class?" And I was like, "What?" Like I'm a student. I don't know why he wants me, but he couldn't come to class. He was filming, right? So I just started directing the scenes in class, and then something clicked, almost like a light switch, and I just lost interest in acting and really started being interested in directing because I think what the light switch was, oh wow, I have to look at all the characters in this play instead of it than just mine. It became a bigger picture, and I really liked that. And I never acted again until, I mean, it was 20 years, and I did a Cirque show, which only because my friend directed it. I would never have auditioned for a Cirque show, but I looked a lot like the character, the real character it was based on. So he asked me to do it, and then, but that was, that was 20 years later. So I started directing in undergrad, and not officially though. I couldn't because I was an actor and enrolled as an actor. Um, they wouldn't give me like space in the theater department, so I would go over to the engineering department because of if one door closes, I just go to another door, and I would just reserve space in the engineering department, and I would direct shows, and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have any training. I think I took one directing class. Um, and so, right out of college, I applied for an internship at the Mark Taper Forum, which is a regional theater here in Los Angeles. And I was paired with, I did a literary internship with a playwright called Han Ong, which I don't know if you've heard of, but, and at the time, he was the assistant to the staff producer at the Taper. So he said to me at one point, he didn't really know what to do with me. He was sort of like, okay, she's there, and I know she's my intern, but I don't really, I'm not sure what to do with her. So he would say, oh, there's this, this play on my desk. It's really long. You should read it. And I was like, okay. So I would be in the rehearsal room. Brian Kulick, who used to run the Public, he was directing at the time, directing the Hong On play called Reasons to Live, Half No Reasons, which is an amazing play if you ever get a chance to read it. Um, and a scene wasn't working, and the director and the playwright were getting really aggravated and kind of walking out of the room. And then, not, me again, when one door opens, I'm very verbal. And so I said, can I make a suggestion? And they said, okay. And I said, it's just too stagnant. I think the actors need to move. And they were like, oh. And so they gave the actors movement, and the scene worked. And then Han took me aside, and he said, I'm leaving to go to San Francisco to be a playwright, and I think you should take my job. And I was like, what job? And he said, oh, I'm the assistant to the staff producer, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, long story short, I got the job. And the play he had me read was Angels in America, Perestroika, because Millennium Approaches was being done in London, and they were about to workshop Perestroika. So I had a new boss at the Taper who, she's, I don't even know what she's doing now, but she's not the Taper anymore. Her name was Corey Beth Madden. And she was pregnant, and she said, I can't go to rehearsals. Can you go to these rehearsals and report back the next day? So I'm in the room with Tony Kushner, and he's writing. I mean, this is crazy to say it, but it's true. So he's writing Angels in America. It's a workshop production, which I don't know if you guys this is a really cool thing. There's an equity contract called the workshop contract, and when you do that, Hamilton did this, which is why the actors get paid every time it's produced. When you do a workshop contract, you're contributing as an actor, as a director, you're contributing to the development of the play, right? And so you get paid when that play is produced. So it was a workshop production. So the actors were very active in creating Perestroika. And in fact, sometimes would improv a scene, and Tony would write it down, and then he would hand me the paper, and I would go type it and bring it back. And then it was a scene in the play. Like, that's how it worked. So I was watching that, and I was like, okay, interesting. And that was sort of the first time I ever worked on a new piece. And there was a dramaturg in the room. So there was two directors, Tony Taccone and Oscar Eustace. Oscar Eustace now runs the public. Tony Taccone, I don't know what Tony's doing, to be honest. I think he left Berkeley Rep, but I could be wrong. But he ran Berkeley Rep. That was his career. So there was two directors and a dramaturg, and I'm watching that, right? As someone who does, it's my first kind of experience in a room with the playwrights there, obviously. Um, and so what happened after that? So So when I left the Taper, I left to start my own theater company called the Road Theater, which is still going strong. And I basically felt that I wanted to produce new work after watching this process, right? And being fascinated by it and really loving it. Um, and someone at some point had advised me, if you want to direct, could develop relationships with playwrights, which sounds super simple, right? It's great advice, but a lot of directors just sort of wait for a job to come to them and direct what's on the page, and that's it. And the playwright may never be in the room. The playwright be dead. It could be a classic play. So it's very different to have the playwright in the room. So I started to do that. So I started to kind of befriend and have relationships with playwrights. Um, and then the way I describe it is I became an accidental dramaturg, because when I'm in the room with a playwright directing their play, there's always going to be a scene that doesn't work, as witnessed by going back to the Taper, to Reasons to Live. It's not necessarily the directing or the acting, it might be the writing, right? So inevitably there were these moments where I thought, oh gosh, the scene doesn't work, and I would go and take five, and I would talk to the playwright. I love when the playwright's in the room. That's my preference. I love it because I can ask them a question. To be honest, most of the time they're going to say they don't know, because they don't. They'll say, well, I don't know why I wrote it, but that sounds good. Or, they're writing something. It's not like they're, directors, we like create a concept sentence and we have a point of view and it's a very strong point, all those things. We go through this process that's very specific, and that's not necessarily a process that a playwright has. So he may not know the answer to the question, but regardless, I love them there to make sure that we're on the same page, and that I'm fulfilling their vision, which is what I feel my job is, as opposed to putting a concept on something that something they don't want. So okay, so started the Road Theater, which at the time only produced new plays. But I said, I really want to develop them. So we brought in a playwriting group called the Golden West Playwrights. I think they're disbanded now, but and I started their reading series, which is still going strong 21 years later, called Road Signs. And we had a reading series, we did workshops, and this was sort of new. And a lot of the readings would be produced by the theater, because that's how we found, sort of tried out the material. But the main thing that was important is my relationships with playwrights, and giving them a place to develop their work, to have actors read their work, to work through any problems in the play was just huge. Just giving playwrights a space and resources is huge. So we did that, and then I was an artistic director of a theater when I was 21. I don't recommend that. But I was 21, and I thought, oh God, I need more training, right? Because there's nothing like being the boss to get to make you go, I don't know what I'm doing. So I said I need more training. So I resigned and I went to grad school. And I majored. I went to CCM, which is in Cincinnati. Do you guys know? Um, University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music, and I got my master's in theater. Developed more relationships. Right, a lot relationships are crucial and important in what you're going to do, and will shape your whole career in life. Um, Worked with developing new pieces there with some of the students, um, and then I had was going to do my thesis. I wanted to do Amadeus, which is one of my favorite plays. Um, and but I had to do my internship first. So I chose Seattle Rep, which at the time had a great internship program. And I originally signed up for a play that's not a new play. I think it was a Sam Shepard play. And so, but then when I got there, they said, "Oh, hey, do you want to do this new play instead?" And it was called Cider House Rules. And Peter Parnell was writing it in the room. Part two, he already wrote part one. And the director was Tom Hulce, who played Amadeus in the movie Amadeus. So I was like, what? I'm about to direct this play and I have this actor who I'm going to assist him. It was crazy. So I was like, yeah, yeah, take me out of Sam Shepard and put me in the new play. So they put me in the work, and it was a writing workshop. And again, I'm in the room. There's two directors, Tom Hulce and Jane Jones. Jane Jones founded and I think she's still there. Founded and runs Book It in Seattle, which is a company that adapts books into plays. Is basically what she does. So Cider House Rules was a book, right? So this is perfect for her. So Tom Hulce and Jane Jones are co-directing. There's a dramaturg. There's a playwright. It's almost and it's a 6-hour play, exactly like I went through at the taper. So I was like, okay, history's repeating itself. So I'm watching the playwright and the dramaturg and the director and how that relationship works, right? Which is very specific. And I'm assisting the directors. So, whatever that means, every director, if you guys want to talk about that, I can help. I can talk to you about that, but it depends on the director as to what they have you do. And the play goes up, and then it ends up move. I'm sure you guys know about the play. It ends up moving to the taper. It was done in New York. It was a I think it was done at the Public. No, it wasn't done at the Public. I can't remember, but it was in New York. So that was my second 6-hour play. So at this point, I'm like, okay, 6-hour plays don't scare me. So I have to go back to grad school after talking to Tom Hulce, night after night over Thai food or whatever about his portrayal of Amadeus, of Mozart. Go back, I direct this show, my thesis production at CCM, and get my master's in directing. And then I moved back to LA and become sort of an independent. I'm from LA, so it's easier, right? I was born and raised. So I moved back to LA, became an independent director, and um, started. I joined the Directors Lab the first year it was ever. So that was 2000. I applied to the Directors Lab and got in. Did that year, or it's not a year, it's a week, but did it that year. And we had a playwright come to the Directors Lab, and he was workshopping a play called Pandora's Trunk. And I sat next to, it was the playwright and the producer for some reason was there. And I sat next to them and we were kind of talking. And what was being workshopped was a little strange, but I had said to them, always carry cards with you, by the way. I had said to them, I really like this play. Here's my card if you ever need a director. Never thought about it again. They called me after they got funding, and they said, we're doing it at LATC, which is a big theater in Los Angeles. And we want you to direct it. And I mean, they didn't ask for my resume or anything. Again, relationships, they just liked me. I call it Desert Island. Like, that's how I just hired my intern. I'm like, I can be on a desert island with him. So they hired me. And and so this was with Kim Fields and Tanya Pinkins. I don't know if you know who they are, but Kim Fields was on Facts of Life, which you guys are too young for, but maybe you've seen it in syndication. But she was a television actress, And Tanya Pinkins, of course, won the Tony for Jelly's Last Jam, but she's a TV actress big time now. So she does a lot of TV stuff. So I walk into this play, into rehearsals. I'm directing this play. We actually went through a few actresses. It was supposed to be a solo show with voice, like an offstage voice. And I ended up actually casting two actors, but it was sort of reviewed and considered a solo show because the actor was like it was more like an offstage voice. So that was sort of my first solo show. I'd never directed a solo show before. I didn't have any idea what I was doing. But I'm young, so there's benefits to that. Like you're just like, okay, like you're not really afraid of anything, right? So I just did it. And it was a huge success, sold out every night. It ended up going to the National Black Theater Festival twice, and then it did something called the Chicklin Circuit, which is a huge tour. So I think it still plays. A lot of people have been in the role, but it's basically a solo show about an adopted girl who imagines her mother as being, various different celebrities, and she dresses like the celebrities, and it's really cute. Anyway, light and fluffy though. There's like maybe two moments that are deep, but generally light and fluffy. So at some point, I became known as like the director to go to if you want to develop a solo show, and I think it started with Pandora's Trunk, which is why I mentioned that show. I was a member of SDC at the time, which is our union. And I was just, signing a lot of contracts, doing a lot of solo shows. I worked with you guys know Vita, that show Vita on Stars. There's the person who plays Eddie. Her name is Sarah Anzotegui. I developed her solo show with her, and we've done it 100 times at different. From venues to schools. I don't think she does it anymore, but and then I'm trying to think who else you might know. Oh, Carlos Alazraqui from Reno 911. Do you watch Reno 911? You guys too young? He plays Garcia. He's also the voice of a million cartoon characters. So I directed his and developed his solo show. So I just sort of started getting known for this and getting jobs. And then basically started LA Writer Center in 2006, and since then, have been developing developing anything. We do everything. So, but solo work seems to be we have about 40 solo artists, so we have a lot of them. So that's sort of the journey. So, LA Writer Center became my focus in 2006, and I've been developing new work with writers, mostly local, but not all, ever since. So it took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do and what I felt comfortable doing, but I finally have gotten there. But sometimes it takes a while, and sometimes you have to do other things and go, oh, I don't want to do that. Sometimes you have to do it to know you don't want to do it. So that was sort of the journey to developing new work. And I guess within the Writers Center, we have something called the Monday Night Workshop, which is where people come in and develop their work. And we had a reading series with Syzygy Theater Company. So we partnered with, so we would have actors, and we had this amazing reading series, and we ended up pivoting with COVID and putting it online. We pivoted everything with COVID, so all of the classes are online now. And the I wanted to provide content for the writers, so I started a webinar series and brought in professionals from TV and film and theater, and now I ended up talking some of those professionals into co-teaching with me. So I'm teaching how to write a TV pilot class with a showrunner of 30 years, which is awesome because I learn a lot. We give totally different notes. He gives notes like he's in the writer's room, which is very different than what I would give as a dramaturg. But it's great for the students to get both perspectives. So the pivoting added a lot of classes and a lot of webinars, and then we started the Breathe reading series, which the playwrights wanted to do for Black Lives Matter, and direct just wanted to present BIPOC pieces, mostly BIPOC writers. In direct response to Black Lives Matter and George Floyd's murder. So we presented Strange Fruit, which is a 6 hour play. See how it all comes back. And we presented that last fall, and we have a play. We do them live, and we do them with HowlRound. HowlRound is a theater platform. It's a platform for theater artists, and they have a much bigger reach than I do. So we did the Directors Lab last year virtually, and 6,500 people saw it, which is amazing because usually 50 directors in a room participate. So that was quite a bigger audience. And with the reading series, about 600 people saw the reading, which normally again would be 100 people in a theater. So there's benefits to being online for sure. We're learning, and we have two plays coming up: Villains and Chasing the Wolf. So very exciting time for the Writer Center, and lots of new work being done, lots and lots of work being developed. So that's been our focus basically since March, when we all went into shutdown mode. So so in terms of working with playwrights, you know how they say that saying, people teach you how to treat them. It's true. I've had actors do this too, where I learn a lot from being in the room with people and how to work with people. And it's a tricky thing giving a note to a playwright, and that's their baby, you know. It's a tricky thing. It's actually an art, I think, to giving a note. I teach people how to give a note because I think it's an art. But at the end of the day, it's just honesty, and making sure they understand sort of why it's not working, and I ask a lot of questions. That's the kind of teacher I am. So I'm very like, I'll 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 ask all the sort of important questions, and then just sort of give them time and then they'll bring back pages, and usually they've addressed the issues. So I'm less of a, this is what this play needs person, and a more of a, what do you think the play needs person. And I find that works better, and it also just is the way I am. But I think, because I don't think I have all the answers, but I'm pretty good at bringing up the questions that they need to look at. So yeah, and we have certain tools with the Writer Center. We have something called a concept sentence that everybody has to bring in to the workshop before they can start a piece. It helps them. It's really for them. But it also helps the people developing the piece with them, so we know what they're trying to write, and we can help them, right? So generally, the workshops are structured. I never do more than 10 writers, and we assign the pages and we read the pages. And again, this is what I saw. Again, going back to how I was trained, this is what I saw with Tony Kushner and Perestroika, right? So I'm taking what I've learned in the past and bringing it into my present. And the playwrights will read each other's pages, and then I'll give notes first, and then the other playwrights give notes. So the pieces at the Writer Center are really, it's owned by the playwright, but they get a lot of notes from a lot of different people, and you just take what you can or what you want, and then throw out the rest. It's that kind of a thing. So so that brings us up to date, I think, with kind of how I ended up developing new plays. I guess one of the things, because you're directors, I did have somebody ask me once, in an interview, how I direct a solo show, because it's different, right? There's, you know, you're looking at a stage with one person, and they have to convey that there's other people on stage with them. That's not easy. Um, so when I told her the answer, she thought it was really weird and strange, and I thought everyone did it. Do you know those kind of things? You're like, doesn't everybody do that? But what I do is I play the other parts. So I get on stage with the actor, and let's say they have a scene. I wish I could think of a solo show we would all know, but let's say they have a scene, with, it's a wife, and they have a scene with the husband. I'll play the husband, and I'll do the blocking. So I block for both characters, even though one's never going to be there. The audience will never see it, but the actor will remember it, and they'll remember how close I got to them, and they'll feel that, right? So it's sense memory in a way. They'll remember how close I got to them if there was a fight. They'll remember if I left the room, right? So if they got in a fight and the husband leaves the room, the actor, like if the actor's line is, "Hey, where are you going?" It looks, they could say, "Hey, where are you going?" Or they go, "Hey, where are you going?" Right? But but they wouldn't know that the other character left the room unless I did the scene with them as the other character. Does that make sense? So we block both parts. And I play the other part until they can remember what happened, and then they just remember. So it's a little. I don't know if you guys have you heard of Michael Chekhov? It's an acting technique. It's a little like Michael Chekhov in that you're remembering how your body felt at the time, and but I find it's really helpful to actors to have that process. So that's what I do when I direct solo shows. Um, it's just, I guess, everybody's different. Um, so what else can I tell you about solo work? It's very personal, right? So like, the play, so something like Angels in America or Kentucky Cycle, which I also worked on a little bit at the Taper. Something like that is, they're writing about not necessarily from their personal experience, probably pulling things from their life, but it's not a biography. It's not about them personally. Solo stars usually are. Not all the time. Certainly, I Am My Own Wife was written by Doug Wright, and an actor played it. So that they exist for sure. Um, but most of the people I work with, the actors I work with, are writing something very personal, usually adapted from a memoir, and they've usually overcome something huge, and want to educate or help people in some way. Um, so that can be tricky, right? Giving notes to somebody who is writing about themselves, and their story is so personal. And sometimes I have to say to them, like, for example, Suzanne and I love cats, so this is a great example. So this guy had, this one guy had a song. It was a musical, a song about his cat dying, and the play wasn't about that. So I sort of had to sit him down and go, "I'm so sorry, but I think we have to cut the song about the cat dying." And he was devastated. But when you look at the concept sentence, and every scene has to refer back to it. If it doesn't, I don't know why it's in the play. And there was no room. So sometimes you have to have those conversations, and they're super delicate, and it's his life. These are people's life stories, or life rights, as they say in Hollywood. So it's trickier. But that's why I have tools like concept sentences, and I have a workbook with a bunch of tools in it, so that they go through the process of doing the exercises, and they know why they exist, and everything has to go back to that exercise, and if it doesn't, they should consider cutting it. um, some other tricks I kind of do is, if one of the big things I run into with solo shows is the story is really epic, right? And so cutting is really difficult. So, what I've done in the past is I've said, why don't you write like a book, right? And then we'll pull from it. Because then they have their story written down. So they're pulling from a source material, and they don't feel like they're not telling their story. They're gonna be able to tell the whole story in a different medium, which is a book. But in a play, you can only tell like this much of the story, right? Because we solo shows are usually an hour and a half. I mean, it depends on the show, but that's kind of what I would create. So that helps a lot with cutting stuff too. We also have tools for cutting stuff, like exercises. I've had playwrights, or actually, I had somebody come to me the other day. She wrote a pilot for TV, and the network gave her a note, and she said, "I don't know what this note means." And so I read the note, and I was like, "Oh, they want your main character to have a monologue." And she's like, "Why don't they just say that?" And I was like, "I don't know." But that's what they're saying. So sometimes it's, it's a matter of, applying sort of these exercises to that. So one of my students had to cut 30 pages or something crazy, something a lot of pages. And that's all they said to him. Cut 30 pages and walked away. No guidance, nothing. And so I developed these exercises called action objective, where and function, where it makes it much easier to cut things, because if it doesn't, again, if there's no action objective in the scene, I'm not sure the scene should be there. If there's no function for the scene, I'm not sure why the scene's there. So it's a tool, so it makes it less personal when you have to cut it, right? It's not so personal. So so those are some things I do, but solo work is very, it's tender. It's usually their story, and so it's just an awareness of that. The other thing, there's another trick I do, which is, let's say the playwright's name is Donna, and in the play, her, the person playing her, or the person, the character that's portraying her story is Debbie. I'm making that up, but um, when I'm talking to to Donna about the play, I'll say Debbie, and this is an actor. Actors and acting teachers and directors do this. This is where I stole it from, right? But at the end of the day, if I say, when you go to the store, I don't understand why you ask for, where the ding dongs are, right? I'll say, when Debbie goes to the store, I don't under now I know that's a tiny little switch, but it makes it less personal, right? Because it's their life story. So if I'm referring to the character as the character with the character's name, it's much easier for them to function in the writer's room as the writer. And that's the thing, they have to be the writer and the actor most of the time. It's really hard. And they have to, and often because new plays are alive, right? So they're constantly changing. So if you're someone who doesn't like change, it's maybe not good to direct new work. But they're constantly changing, and up until opening and after opening, so this Sheldon Epps, who used to be the artistic director of the Pasadena Playhouse, once said that he learns most about his productions in the second production. So that tells you how long it takes to develop a play. So sometimes the play goes up and you're still like, oh yeah, we got to change some things. And so hopefully by the second or third production, it's got, it's about where it should be. Um, but yeah, it just makes it easier to disconnect the writer a little bit when they have the writing hat on. Um, and then they have, then they go, and it happens all day. They're doing a scene and you have to stop and go, is that the right word for that scene? So all of a sudden they go boom from an actor to a writer really fast, which again isn't easy. I don't think I could do it. I mean, these things that they do, I astonish me. And, I don't think I could do that. That's a quick switch. But they wrote the play, so they have to do that. I have a friend who wrote a play called Nine Parts of Desire, which premiered at the Geffen. It is a solo show. But after she acted in it, it was her story. After she acted in it, she never acted in it again. And it's been done in like 30 languages all over the world. It's about 9 women by 9 actors. So it was never done as a solo show again, or hardly ever. And she just became the playwright. So, that, and for her it was easier, because, again, it's a really quick switch. So those are some of the challenges for sure with solo work. Um, and, you just find it. And, I think workshopping it as fast as possible for me, getting a scene up is going to help me see if it works. And it's going to help the writer. I think it helps the writer twice as fast, because you can see if it works, right? It's visual, so you go, oh, wait, oh, they can't get from A to B. There's something missing or whatever it is, but it's a visual. So I like to workshop stuff as much as possible and as soon as possible, and then go into production, which is really, again, expensive. And so people don't do it. People don't workshop as much as they used to, but I think that's why we do it, even though we do it on Zoom now. That's why we do it with the Writer Center, because it's just so much faster to visually see if something works. What else can I tell you? Uh,
Do students have questions? Do
yeah,
they
do
have
you have questions?
questions about anything that Sheree has talked about so far? Um, yeah, let's see.
Do you want to call on them or do you want me to? You want me to? Okay, Matthew.
Hi, I'm a
Hi.
very big fan of solo shows and like shows even like what the Constitution means to me that are like solo.
Yeah.
And what do you think it's just the personal nature that makes them so successful?
Mm.
Or is it the journey or some combination of?
Well, I found that the best way for an audience to become attached to a character is if the character looks at the audience and speaks to them. And that is a whole solo show. But if you think about it, like, there's some plays. Okay, oh well, let's look at Shakespeare, right? We kind of like, Iago because of the sides. If we look at Othello, we kind of like him because he has these asides or whatever. We like those characters because they speak to us directly. So we just can't help but like them. Neil Labute uses that against us in one of his plays. I forget the name of the play, but we love this guy because he talks to us the whole time, and at the end, he's the villain.
This
And
is
I
how
was,
it goes.
yeah,
This is
and I was so
how it
mad.
goes.
I was like, oh, he got me. But we just like them when they talk to us directly. And that's what a solo show is. I mean, there's solo shows that don't necessarily do that. But I mean, there's so many different types. I have this sort of, I can give it to Suzanne if you want, this sort of history of solo show thing. And there's so many different types, like Lily Tomlin's solo show, Search for Intelligent Life. She never plays Lily Tomlin. She plays character, and that character goes in and out of characters. She, this homeless woman, but she's never Lily Tomlin, you know. Um, John Leguizamo is always John Leguizamo, and then he goes in and out of characters. So there's different approaches, and there's some that are totally narrative. There's some that are really experimental. I mean, I would even say there's dance, like Rachel Rosenthal. She's someone who used the solo dance, but I would call it a solo show because there's a story. Um, so there's so many different approaches and ways to do it, um, and I think there's also sort of tricks. So when I was working with Sarah Nzotegi, she was sort of writing realism. Like she was just like, this is my, I'm from, I lived in LA and Buenos Aires, and she just sort of prose, right? Just sort of realism prose, which is my least favorite. So I was like, ugh. So I gave her a tool. Tools are really useful. And I said, write something you would never write. So a song or piece of poetry, something you would never ever do that you're terrified of, and bring it back. So she wrote one of her stories in poetry, and it gave her permission to do that. The assignment gave her permission to do that, right? Because I don't think it occurred to her that she could do that in a show. And then her show changed drastically and became very poetic and very different. And and that's what we end up calling style, right? So a playwright's style can take a while to develop, you know. But that's now her style. But when she first started writing, it wasn't. So she just needed that permission and given that tool. Um, anyway, back to your question, I think it's because they talk directly to the audience. So we are engaged right away and invested right away, and we care right away. And getting an audience to care is hard, um, and important and necessary. So anyway, it takes care of all three of those things right away because we're addressing the audience for the most part. Um, does that answer the question?
No, it does. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Katie.
Hi, thank you for all of that.
Sure.
You mentioned at the beginning of this about assistant directorships. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit
Yeah,
more onto that because I know for a lot of us, the directing opportunities we have in school is really limited to either like exclusively assistant directing or exclusively directing, and I'm the latter. So I was wondering if you could speak about that a little bit more.
sure. Um, so I my experience assistant directing was regional theater, which I highly recommend. The first show was at Cincinnati Playhouse in the Park, and what I learned the most, because it wasn't a very good director, to be honest. Sometimes I watch a director and I go, "Oh my God, I would never do that," and it helps. It's that is also a valid way of learning. You know what I mean? You don't always have to find what they're doing positive, right? But it was sort of not a great director. But what I learned from it was how to structure a rehearsal, which is huge. And something I wasn't taught in grad school. And why would you? I mean, it's not something that's taught really. So I watched how they structured the rehearsals, and then I've used that structure sort of ever since. Um, but regional theater is good for that kind, learning kind of the professional way things are done. Even if the director's not great, you're still going to learn, you know. But it was a play. You guys are probably too young, but it was a play called Notebook of Trigorin, which was Tennessee Williams' adaptation um, of The Seagull. And he had written it and put it in a trunk, and there was a reason. It was bad, you guys. It was bad. Okay. But Lynn Redgrave wanted to do it. Do you know who Lynn Redgrave is? Okay, really famous actress. So they did it. And she and Ming Cho Lee designed the set. I mean, these are like super, this is like the most famous, maybe one of the most famous set designers in the world, right? So I'm in grad school and I'm around all these people. And again, director was bad, but I'm having lunch with Lynn Redgrave. Who, what? Like, that's crazy. And then Ming Cho Lee was kind of weird to me at first, you know. He was just like, didn't give me the time of day, but I worked with his son at the Road Theater. So I mentioned that to him, and then I was his child. Then I was like under his wing. Oh my God, you know my son. And he said he taught me so much about directing. The sound designer taught me more about directing. So he said to me something I've never forgotten and I will never ever do differently. He said, don't give an actor a note, work the note. He said, just don't do it. Like, unless it's a tiny note. And I was like, oh, so like what he meant was, when directors sit and give their notes at the end of rehearsal and then everybody goes home. Instead of doing that, like let's say the note is when you walk over to the table, can you take the pen and throw it? So instead of telling that to the actor, we get up and do it. And then then it's done. The actor's done it. You can move on, and it's so much more. It's just a better way to give a note. It'll just hit everyone. Again, visual. We did it. We all saw it, and we're moving on. But if I just say the note, I don't know if it'll happen tomorrow because we didn't do it. We didn't try it. We didn't see if it worked. So that was from a sound designer. No directing professor taught me that. No, watching a director didn't teach me that. And then I think I assisted. Do you guys know Tracers? Vietnam ensemble piece. Okay, I assisted the director on that, and he also wrote it with 8 Vietnam vets. And I actually did many productions of that because he tends to. He wants the women to be crew. He wants the crew members to be women because all the actors are men. So to have that balance. So and I learned a lot from him. He was real old school. And it wasn't at regional theaters. These are smaller theaters in LA, like the Odyssey, and we actually did some stuff at UCLA too. But then I guess the next one I did was with Tom Hulce and Jane Jones, and you know, I kind of picked like it's kind of hard to assist 2 directors, so I kind of picked Tom, and we would just, I mean, honestly, it depends on the director. It was important to him that he needed me to get him food so he could focus. That was a big thing. So you kind of feel like a runner sometimes, and but it's what he needed. So I would always get him food. We would eat it together, and then I could ask him questions and talk to him then. I also did I don't know if you guys are interested in TV, but I followed Jimmy Burrows on Will and Grace, which again, not necessarily the best experience, but you have this opportunity to ask this, like, probably the most famous TV director in the United States questions. And what he said to me was, he said, I always hire theater directors and theater actors because they understand the broadness of a sitcom. So, as opposed to like an independent actor who does independent movies, can they do a sitcom? Maybe. But theater actors get the broad, they get the bigness, right? So, you just learn little stuff like that. But I think it's important to do it because you learn how things work. You're not always going to get a good director, that's fine, but you might, and that's awesome. I'm just trying to think of a good director that I followed or that I learned from. But it's weird. I learned more from the designers. Not to say the directors wouldn't have taught me anything, but somehow the designers took me under their wings, and and they ask questions that are really great for directing. Really important questions because they have to design something, and you go, "Oh God, I didn't think about that." Designers are great. I use the same ones over and over again because we all speak the same language, and it's like shorthand now. It's like they're in my head. So, but it took a while. It takes a while to find your people, to find your tribe, but it's important to do it. So yeah, I would do regional theater assisting so you can see how it works. I mean, even when I worked on the Cirque show, which is the biggest production I've ever worked on, millions and millions of dollars, watching the designers and the crew work, it's just fascinating to watch and see how things work, even if it's just, okay, I'm going to go do this because I want to see the scale. I want to see how they do this at this scale, you know?
Thank you.
Sure. Zach?
Um, Hi.
Hi.
I've been kind of finding my directing style in the last week, and I think I think I've come to the conclusion that I'm a very like character-based director. Like I love doing the whole like talking about the characters, doing all that inside work.
Table work?
Yeah. Do you have any like tips on how I could possibly go like further and like really like getting into the minds of the character and the location and all that?
The minds of the characters. I don't know. I mean, I think talking to the actors about it helps. But research. I do a lot of research. I mean, I'm a dramaturg, so that's natural. I love research, and I will research the heck out of each character, whether they're historical or not, doesn't matter. But I usually come into a rehearsal completely over researched and over prepared, and then I don't really even use any of it. But at the end of the day, I feel more confident that if an actor's going to ask me a question, I can at least attempt to answer it. Most of the time, it's okay to say you don't know, you know, but at the end of the day, research, I think, for the characters as much as you can. I always want to know, or at least try to know the answer if the actor has a question about the character. Um, and it's also like, what does the character do for a living? It's actually the same research the actor would do. I do that for each character. Maybe not everything, but I do a broad sweep. um, Same with locations and all that stuff. I just research it. And in terms of visuals, I'm not really one of the a lot of directors will put together like a board with visuals, or they have like a pin, like Pinterest is like a digital version of like, the boards that directors put together, or a lot of people put together. I don't really do that. That doesn't help me as a director necessarily. But I think every director is different and approaches it differently. The acting style I studied all of the acting styles, but my favorite one was Michael Chekhov. So I tend to, it's a physical approach. So although I love table work, I do it, but I want to get up. I want to get up fast, I find, um, and try things. And so, and you can find out a lot about a character that way. And just Michael Chekhov techniques, you know. So I tend to pull from, you know, whatever, all the things I've learned and whatever works. But I think if you guys can take acting classes, it's going to serve you because you'll be able to talk to an actor. One of the things Jimmy Burrows said to me was, um, the reason one of the reasons I want theater directors instead of the actors is they know how to talk to actors. They're not afraid of actors. And they know how to do dramaturgy and tell a story and give notes. Um, those are two very difficult things to find, especially in film and television. Most directors are trained to how to block on camera, or they're trained to know how to use a camera. So it's technical. And what he was looking for was the exact opposite. He's like, I can teach you to block on camera. I can't teach you to give an actor a note or not be afraid of an actor. I mean, you have to. Theater teaches you that, right? It doesn't happen that much in TV and film because they don't rehearse that much. Okay, we have 8 minutes left. Melody.
Hello.
Hello.
I wanted to ask more specifically about the avenue of new play development, like
Yeah.
as a possible career, because I'm primarily a director and also like a playwright, and I work, you know, with like new work at my college. But in terms of like going for jobs in that direction, I wanted to know like what the process is like because I know that companies choose a lot of the same people that they trust and have been there. So I
Yeah.
want to know like you know like what that's like.
I would definitely do an internship because um, I would never know. I would never get to work with Tony Kushner if I didn't do an internship at a regional theater. No way. I would never have known him or Peter Parnell or any of the writers I worked with. I think that you just have to go for the, you know, for regional, for the best. Go for the best and intern. And if you can intern for a literary manager or a director of new play development, that's what I would go for. Um, it's helpful to them that you're a playwright. It's helpful to them that you're a dramaturg. Um, and you know they get a lot of scripts in, so even if it's just being a reader, I would highly recommend being a reader. um, I remembered one job I read 500 scripts in a very short period of time, and there was only one that I would even consider good enough to do. And when I met with the playwright, I knew I couldn't work with him because he was just really, really, really crazy. And I was like, I can't. So that's the other thing I wanted to say is no, it's really good to know when to walk away. If you're not a good match for a playwright, if your concept of their show is different than their concept, you should walk away, because it'll be a disaster and everyone will be miserable. And I've seen people get into contracts and they can't get out, and it's a disaster. So you really want to make sure when you meet with the playwright for coffee that you're on the same page. But knowing when to walk away or knowing when not to hire somebody or not to work with somebody is just as valuable as taking the job. But I would say, anyway, back to your question, regional theater, director of play development, or literary manager. There's not that many director of new play development because there's not never any money for it. But there's a few. I don't know where you live, but you don't have to live. Actually, it's all digital now. It doesn't matter where you live. But there's some exciting new directors of new play development that are coming in. A lot of women, people of color. I would say they just hired a really cool one. Where did I see it? Woolly Mammoth. Woolly Mammoth just hired a really. I think she's really good. You know, you could just call or email and say, I'm graduating. Can I intern for you? And you know, she's digital. She's not in Washington. Like no, because that's where Woolly Mammoth is. But nobody's going in to work right now. So it's a really good time, you know, because you can work from home digitally, to get into certain places that you wouldn't necessarily be able to, you know. It's also a really good time to ask for help and advice because people have free time. I've been kind of amazed at who I can get to come talk to my students. I've been like, wow, will you come do this? And they're like, yeah. I mean, they're not, you know, there's not a lot of shooting. There's some shooting going on, but for you know, for the most part, it's shut down and people are really at home, looking for something to do. And so it's a good time to go, hey, can you talk to me, or or can you come into a class or whatever. I've found that anyway. Okay, so anyway, I'm veering off, but regional theater. Do it. Intern there. Jenna.
Yeah, so I actually was able to take a solo performance class last semester, and we just kind of like talked about creating your own piece and kind of how that whole process starts. And I think something that I really kind of struggled with as like a solo performer was the editing process, and I mean, I even struggled with like it with the directing stuff. So how do you kind of do that editing process with the solo person? I know you kind of talked about it a little bit, but
Yeah.
it's kind of more like how do you know what like is the key concepts that they really want to hit and kind of like
You
get
know
them
what?
to kind of bring that out of them?
The concept sentence. So, can I type it on here real quick? I know this is the last question, but this is a story about how the protagonist does what in order to why, right? So this is a story about how the protagonist's name goes here, does what, that's their action, in order to why, that's their objective. If you can get that concept sentence, you are going to save for yourself or for the person you're working with, you're going to save yourself so much trouble, because you just constantly go back to it. It answers, does this scene have to do with that? Oh, then it might not work. Why is it in there? Sometimes they are in there, there can be, it's funny. That's a big one. But it's funny. I don't want to cut it. Um, oh, I didn't share it yet. Sorry. Okay, do you guys see it? Okay, it's in there. So yeah. So you basically fill in the protagonist, the what and the why. And that's a tool for you to help you immensely. That's the first thing I have people do. When they come to pilot class, they have to come with their concept sentence. So we can help them. So we know what they're writing, you know. Hopefully that helps. But yeah, tools. There's lots of tools that you can use and bring into your rehearsals to help people with different problems, whether it's the writers or the actors. Um, but we're all just trying to tell a story, and if we're all on the same page and we're all telling the same story, your life will be a lot easier. So I think it's about having the leadership skills to talk about what the story is, and all going in that direction. And this can help you a lot. This concept sentence. It's a good place to start anyway. Okay. Well, I think that was all we had time for question wise. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Sheree, thank you so
Thank
much.
you. It was
Yes.
really fun. It was great to see you all. I wish you the best of luck.
Um,